5 seconds to submergence. Submergence deep into the absurd.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I'm good with like long form or open long form conversations that don't necessarily have a strict top list of topics to go through. Just kind of where the flow of conversation goes.
Well, if you thought about it, that is what philosophers did. I mean, that's how philosophy started, by people talking to each other. Have you heard that song "Keep Talking" by Pink Floyd?
I have not.
So it starts with this Stephen Hawking recording of him saying, millions of years ago, humanity was just like the animals. Then something happened that changed everything. We learned to talk. And that kind of, I don't know if you've gone into Nietzsche and have you read The Gay Science at all, but he kind of talks about how the origin or consciousness likely originated from speech and talking, because it brought our attention from the external world into the internal world. I don't know, with your interest in psychology, I wanted to know what you thought about that.
Yeah, well, I'm sure you're familiar with the work of the famous or infamous Noam Chomsky, depending on your take on him. But I think he's of the opinion that language and thought are inextricably linked. That like the language's primary use is thought, and that communication is of a secondary importance. Now, I think Steven Pinker and other linguists and cognitive scientists disagree with him on that. But I suspect he's probably right.
Yes.
I really can't separate language and thought in my own mind. I mean, maybe that's just because I'm a very I kind of think in words. Some people say they think in pictures or images, or they think in numbers, and I'm more of a words guy. I really kind of put sentences together in my head, and also I talk to myself all the time, and of course, being a podcaster, I talk a lot. But that's sort of how and I think also you mentioned psychology. I think people when they're growing up, children, they sort of learn their identity and learn about the world through talking to people and through sharing ideas and getting feedback from their parents and grandparents and peers. So I think I do agree with Chomsky on that.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I agree with him too. I also think of the world in images and in words and in numbers, all of those kind of interchangeably. But the thing is, what we're doing here when we're thinking of images, or we're thinking of numbers, or we're thinking of words, we're thinking. And what happens when we think is that our attention is turned from the outside to the inside, right? Or what do you think?
Could you rephrase the question?
Yeah, do you think that, sure, like even that images also and numbers are also a form of language?
Oh, I see what you're saying. That's a good question, actually. I haven't thought of before.
Yeah, I'm kind of being a little suggestive.
Well, I guess thinking,
but
I mean, I think it is helpful to think of math as a kind of language, since math is really just about relationships between things, I guess is the simplistic way of putting it. And then images. I mean, if you think about like art, I mean, everything from like the primitive cave paintings or anthropologists have found to like, actual more complex art created, animation or paintings. It all sends a message. And so I guess if language is just a way of sending a message, a way of communicating something, an idea, a feeling, an experience, then we can broaden the word language to mean more than just the symbols that we use to write things down.
Yeah, because you're translating an idea or an action or a will into something else, where when you look at it, that same thing is translated back into what they were thinking. Like when you see a cave painting of some stick figure holding a spear, you're thinking hunter, right? Like they drew that and they thought hunter. Most likely they wanted to communicate the idea of the hunter, so that when people look at it, you see, oh, that's a hunter, that's a guy holding a spear.
Yeah, I mean, and I think probably so another interesting random psychology fact you probably know.
Go for it.
There was an experiment they ran, and I don't remember who the experiment or who ran it or what it was even called. But
who's they?
The gist of it was they were trying to see like at what age people become aware of aware of the fact that other people know something they don't. So like chimpanzees, when they've been taught sign language, and I basically stole this from a Vsauce video.
Dude, I was just about to say, do you watch Vsauce? You little bastard.
In a Vsauce video, Michael mentions how when chimps were taught have been taught sign language, the one thing they've never done is asked a question. And this seems to be related to the way a 3-year-old thinks about the world, because I think it's like when a 3-year-old is asked, like they've given a little thought experiment where like, Sally has a cookie she put in a box, and then her friend Lily also has a box but no cookie in it, and then Sally leaves and leaves the room, and Lily takes Sally's cookie and puts it in her box. And then when Sally walks in the room, they ask the 3-year-olds, where is Sally going to look for the cookie? And the 3-year-olds say, well, obviously she's going to look in Lily's box because that's where the cookie is. But as adults, or not even adults, as you get older, probably around 5 or 6-ish, maybe 4, you realize, oh no, Sally doesn't know that Lily put the cookie in her box. So Sally is still going to look for her cookie in her box. So I guess we're talking about language and its relationship with communication.
Yes.
And I guess consciousness. I suspect that also our social relations, like our ability to recognize another being as a complex being, recognize another being at a deeper level. I think that's related to our need to communicate. If we just were programmed to like regard everyone else as just automatons, then language really wouldn't be necessary, I don't think. But obviously our evolution didn't program us in that way. Because we're social beings, we're social creatures.
Yes, I mean it's our ability to distinguish things, recognize them, know what they are, know their dangers, know their advantages, just know what something is and what it does in the world or what it means to you, and being able to translate that thought to other people. Oh, and by the way, I have not introduced you yet. Oh, you're frozen.
For a while, like I'm Nietzsche's concept of.
Hold up, you froze. I think you're back now.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Oh yeah, I should probably introduce you. We've got Matthew Hazelwood here today. on the Into the Absurd podcast. I was very excited to do this with you because since you contacted me, I started listening to your podcasts. I did listen to the one with Keegan on the Nietzsche podcast. That was good. I appreciated that one. And I've been listening to yours that you do with Matt, and it is really good. I think it's one of my favorite podcasts right now. But for some reason, I don't know if it's a spur of the moment, but I can't think of the name of the one you do with Matthew.
Beyond Talking Points, it's called.
Yeah, Beyond Talking Points. Yeah. I don't know why. I was like literally just listening to it, but I listened to the COVID episode. The one with Midsummer was really good. Mainly because I watched the movie and I was thinking all those same things you guys were talking about. But then I listened to the most recent one, I think. And then I listened to your most recent, The Philosopher's Guide to the Apocalypse. And so like, how did you get going on these podcasts? What made you start?
Well, the first one, Beyond Talking Points, it happened just because I saw in like a little podcast subreddit, I just saw Matt's, like he had a little post, and I think it actually at that point had been like a year old or something, and no one had responded to it, or maybe a couple people had and hadn't gone anywhere. And I saw this post. He's like, "Hey, I want to do like a political podcast. You don't have to agree with me politically, so send me a message." And I just sent him a message, and the rest is history, as they say.
Cool.
We both, we disagree most of the time, but we can find ourselves agreeing as well, because neither of our positions or political philosophies or political views are really represented in the mainstream, which I think is something a lot of young people are experiencing. They feel very disenfranchised and disengaged from the establishment, Republican versus Democrat type of politics. And then I started the second one, The Philosopher's Guide to the Apocalypse, because other Matt, or Matt Keck, he's more of a politics and economics guy, although he's willing to talk philosophy, but he's more interested in the concrete than the abstract, and I often think more abstractly. So
me too.
This is some philosophical matters that I wanted to explore on my own, that I just knew Matt wouldn't really be interested in. The last episode of that podcast, in fact, I'm pretty proud of, because I started exploring my ideological shift. Like when I started the podcast with Matt, I was pretty much a mainstream liberal with some differences. I was like a secular talk, almost Young Turks type liberal. I'm not as bad as that, I like to think, but and I've just become, I don't really quite know how I would label myself right in this very moment, but I know I'm really no longer the liberal that I used to be. And so the last solo podcast I did was trying to chart my change in my point of view.
Yeah, and you were talking about how, well, before I get into that, I just wanted to say that your guys' relationship, that's probably the best part of the podcast, mainly because you guys kind of disagree on everything, but you also agree on everything at the same time. It's kind of, so that's what makes it great. You're kind of more like the open-minded person. He's kind of like more closed-minded, but it kind of works in a way where he's always like, dude, it's like this, and this. And you're like, maybe. And then you'll say something, then he'll disagree or he'll agree. And it's cool, man. I'd like to talk to him too. He sounds like a cool guy. But anyways, I was just gonna say, you were talking in that last podcast you did. You were talking about how you kind of inherited your political viewpoints from your parents. And that's kind of what happened to me too, because I because my mom, she's pretty Democrat, and I grew up thinking, oh yeah, Democrats, that makes sense. It's like perfect. Like it's like, what are these Republicans talking about anyways? It doesn't make any sense. Like it didn't make any sense to me growing up because I was so bombarded with the liberal ideology of just whatever the platform was, right? I was just so bombarded with that. And it was so ingrained in my mind that everything about the Republican platform was wrong and everything about the Democrat platform was right. And then as I grew older, I started to realize, well, that just ain't true. Like that's just not true at all. That there are so many good things about the Republican platform, and there are a lot of good things about the Democrat platform, and there's terrible things about both of them that just doesn't work, and it's too ideological. And so like, how did that sort of happen for you? As far as, was there a moment where you're like, wait a minute, I feel like I've been lied to?
Well, when I really first became, like, I guess, interested in politics, or more aware of politics, I was getting it from left-wing sources, but they were left-wing sources outside the mainstream.
Yeah.
So like I said, the Young Turks, Kyle Kalinske, the Humanist Report, things like that.
Yeah.
Which I like to think I've outgrown those as well. But I guess getting my introduction to politics from, left-wing leftists who were still separate from the mainstream left wing, it sort of ingrained in me, I guess, an oppositional attitude of like, we can fight for these principles, but we can do it outside the dichotomy that the Washington establishment give us every 4 years. But there wasn't really a moment. Just as time grew on, as time went on, and as I grew and learned more and read more and talked to various people, I became more and more aware that a lot of the people on a lot of like political commentators on the internet were lying to me. That a lot of I mean, of course, the Washington establishment.
Yeah, or maybe not lying to you, but not necessarily either telling you the full truth or saying things in a biased sort of way.
No, I guess that's a fair way of putting it. It's not necessarily. I mean, I think a lot of talking heads, they believe what they say. They're not necessarily. Well, this is another point that that Matt would probably bring up if you were in this conversation. He talks about the hidden truth and everything, and how something can be technically true, but if you like dig deeper into it, there's like other aspects of the situation which are to kind of go against that, one talking point, which is why our podcast is called Beyond Talking Points.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, there really wasn't one moment where I was like, kind of shattered, like, trust in most people who talk about politics, and I'm able to see kind of the wizard behind the curtain more and more.
Yeah.
And I'm entertaining ideas that at one point might have seemed more like conspiratorial to me than they do now. I mean, I don't think you want to go outright I don't think you want to become a total conspiracy theorist, but
no,
nowadays I almost think that you have to talk a little bit like a conspiracy theorist to fully get the big picture, if that makes sense.
No, I know what you mean. Because if you don't you got to like slightly open your mind to other ideas and other points of view. They might sound outrageous, but at least you're opening your mind to them because they might be true, right? Because there's been so many conspiracy theories that have been true, right? And so you have to like take what people say with a grain of salt and kind of just digest it a little bit. Obviously, most conspiracy theories are probably wrong, especially the most popular ones, because the most popular ones are the most outrageous and people like them. Well, I mean, people like conspiracy theories because it gives one answer or one enemy or like a scapegoat or whatever to all their problems, when in reality, their problems are probably way more complex. So, I mean, that's why conspiracy theories are so appealing to people, because it's, if they just attack this one aggressor or they do this one thing, all their problems will be solved. It just makes life seem simpler. Like God created the whole universe. That's a conspiracy theory in a sense, because it sounds so simple. Like there was just this like old bearded man in the sky that created the universe, and he created me, and there's a heaven and hell, and when you die you go to one of those places based on whether you're good or bad. I mean, that's like a classic conspiracy theory where there's this simple thing that'll answer all your problems to death and life and meaning and everything. But yeah, sorry, I went on a tangent there. But you're right. You have to be a little bit of a conspiracy theorist to understand what's going on.
Well, and I think also at the same time, you have to, we can't necessarily dismiss people who do believe in certain conspiracy theories as just totally stupid and idiotic and like beyond the pale. Because like, I mean, the example that kind of like, I guess I would use if any of our listeners were like, well, we won't like dive into the details about right now, but like in the the scandal with Jeffrey Epstein came out, I thought to myself, like, the people who believed in Pizzagate in the 2010s, like they are now congratulating themselves. They're now being like, this was proof. Jeffrey Epstein is proof that we were right long before everyone else was.
Yeah.
Now I think that's a jumping into conclusions. And I was not, I mean, Pizzagate wasn't true.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there are like I guess the thing I don't like about conspiracy theories is like they sort of take away from the real conspiracies going on.
Yes.
And they simplify the real conspiracies going on.
Yeah.
And there are real conspiracies going on. They're just not as simplistic as like a bunch of lizard people are like, pulling the strings behind the scenes, as cool as that might sound.
Yeah. 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 I mean, that's a good point. That like conspiracy theories kind of take away from the actual more complex conspiracy theory that's actually happening.
There are real conspiracies out there that we're maybe not acknowledging or not dealing with, and people can on the internet who spend people who spend way too much time on the internet can be taken in by fake conspiracy theories, and I'm sympathetic to a lot of these people. So like, I guess one of the, so in my like political trajectory, I guess one of the a moment where I was like diverging from like my family and from a lot of my like liberal friends was when I was acknowledging Trump, was a symptom rather than the problem. He was a symptom of the system breaking down rather than the cause of the system breaking down.
Yes.
And he needed to be put, like the threat he was, he posed needed to be put into perspective. And it wasn't, Hitler, it wasn't Hitler rising to power in the United States. It wasn't going to be, a total calamity. Even if I, despise the man and do consider him a problem of sorts. But people, I mean, Trump derangement syndrome, I think, is a real thing.
Yeah.
And people were like, oh my God, it's the end of the American Republic as we know it. And
I think people definitely overreacted about him.
Oh, the left overreacted in the extreme, and I think it's to the left's shame.
Yeah. He's like, I mean, like, sure, the things that he said were pretty bad, but as far as like what he did wasn't like that bad. At least it definitely wasn't cataclysmic. And some of the things that he did, he was the one who started pulling out the troops. So I've heard people say, I've heard people disagree with him when he's pulling out the troops and then praise Biden for pulling out the rest of the troops. It's like, okay, dude, like you completely just did a 360 because the guy you like just did what the other guy didn't do. I mean, I'm definitely not in support of Trump at all. And I don't really agree with his policies, like any of his policies, except for maybe when he was pulling out the troops. And I didn't really think that he handled COVID like super well. But as far as him being like a terrible president, I don't really think he was that bad.
I mean, I think someone said he governed the way Marco Rubio would probably have governed. I mean, he was basically a standard Republican politician with a potty mouth.
Yeah.
And what the damage he did really was more to like the norms surrounding politics.
Yes.
And so basically what happened was, and I don't think he did this deliberately, I think he did this because he's a moron, but he basically pulled like he pulled the wool from everyone, away from everyone's eyes, and kind of just showed how much of a sham and how much of a theater elections are and politics is.
Yes.
And so it's like I think that's, maybe this almost sounds like a conspiracy, but that might be why like he was so despised by the Democrats, because he was showing how terrible the system, how terrible the system is, or he was showing how the system wasn't functioning. He was showing how Republicans and Democrats aren't, they're not doing what they should be doing if we believe, in the idea of a government representing the people. I don't think he was ever really going to represent the people either, but in the course of claiming he was going to represent the people, he showed that the people are not being represented in the slightest. And so I think that's more why people are so like the Republicans and Democrats are so upset with him, because they lost a degree of credibility and legitimacy when Trump took office and after Trump left office, and people don't really view politics in the same way anymore. Kind of with Obama, I'm going on a bit of a rant, so I apologize, but like with Obama, we could because Obama's a well-spoken gentleman, he's Ivy League educated, he's obviously very intelligent. We could kind of tune out of politics because it's look, we have this elegant figure, this guy who was born into an average family, an African-American gentleman, on top of that, who rose to the top, a typical story of how meritocracy should work. We could tune out of politics and be oh, this is Obama gave a veneer of respectability to American politics and to Washington. And Trump took that away.
Because it was just this super rich guy that had everything handed to him that became president, and it was just kind of it was kind of just I could see how some politicians, at least Democrat politicians, would feel almost as if they got spat on or something with him winning. Especially people who say worked their whole lives to try to people who were actually self-made, who built themselves up to try to get to that point. They'd probably feel kind of insulted by him winning the presidency. And especially you're right in the sense that he kind of exposed how the system is broken by winning the office, because someone like him who speaks like him, with such a vulgar sort of unpresidential way, can become president. It's kind of it's kind of like, what? Like this super rich guy who said just grab her by the pussy became the president of the United States. Like that's just like what the hell? That's just weird, you know?
Well, and it's sort of funny to me, like people don't talk about how like the Republican Party did everything they could to like prevent him from winning the primary.
Yeah.
And they just like utterly failed. Like the Republican establishment, they didn't want like they eventually they accepted Trump won and they like, fell in line because I think that's in many ways, I guess I would say Republicans might be better at playing politics than the Democrats. They're at least more tactful about it sometimes. So they fell in line when he was successful, but they, tried to make sure they did everything they could to prevent him from winning the primary, and they failed. And that's just like, it's so hilarious to me.
Yeah, well, I mean, think about how many people also just voted for him just because they were tired of, because I'm in a sense, like everything in politics feels like this sham, right? It feels like everyone's lying to you. It feels like everyone's kind of being like deceiving about it. And when someone goes up there, like after you've felt like you've been lied to for years, like maybe your whole life, and then someone goes up there, then they have like some potty mouth or whatever, then they talk like as if like none of the sham or whatever mattered, then like that person might feel appealing to you, especially because they're like not a politician. Someone who's not a politician would be appealing to someone who feels like they've been lied to by politicians their whole life. And like that's why he was so popular. That's why people liked him so much. It had nothing to do with what he was going to do for the country. It was everything about him not being them, not being your standard politician, not being some like guy who went to Harvard and law school who thinks that he's better than you. I mean, obviously Trump thinks that he's better than everyone, but he wasn't some dude from academia or whatever, right?
Well, and I think what really sort of interests me about American politics is how like the degeneration that I'm seeing is like the most interesting part, because I would basically describe the system of government here as an oligarchy with democratic tendencies.
Yes. Definitely.
Because I think broadly speaking, the oligarchs do keep a firm grasp on power, but there's still that tinge of democracy left that hasn't been taken away. And so that it's weird. It's almost like Trump's election shows the democratic tendencies still left in the system.
Yeah.
Even if you don't like Trump, it shows that someone who's not just a standard Republican or Democratic politician can get into that position of power, and can do so with the people's support.
I will say, because he's also super rich and rich people already control the world more than politicians, I would say that it also just exposes the oligarchy even more.
No, I think I would agree. I think those two positions aren't necessarily mutually exclusive.
Yes. They aren't at all. I'm kind of siding on both sides, where like he kind of
or Bernie Sanders. I mean, Bernie Sanders, he didn't make it to the primary or the presidency like Trump did, but he got damn near close. And so I guess, like, I don't know. I feel like the will of the people, to use a cliche phrase, isn't entirely like popular activism it isn't entirely a waste of time. No. Given the current conditions. We're not, I mean, it isn't North Korea, really, where basically all popular activism is, well, basically impossible.
Crushed.
And the government has a total grip on the reins of power. I mean, well, I don't know. This is sort of, I guess, I'm thinking out loud here, but I don't know which like, or here's sort of, I guess I'll ask you like a question, and we can like extrapolate on it if we want. But
Sure.
what do you think about like I guess where power lies, like in a democracy or in a republic? Do you see the power as like still totally in the hands of the oligarchy or the government, but they like disguise it better? So like, do you see the U.S. and North Korea basically power is in the same hands, but the U.S. government is more crafty about it, and they make it look like the people's power is what's important, even though it's not? Or do you actually think in the democracies we see nowadays, the people actually have power? I kind of go back and forth on this question, so I'm curious if you have any opinions.
Yeah. Well, a friend of mine, he says that democracy is two wolves and a sheep fighting over what's for dinner. So, in a sense, I think he's very right. Because with this bipartisan system that we have in the United States, well, you hear the phrase divide and conquer, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you can divide people, then you can control them very easily, very, very, very easily, right? But I'm also not one to say that we don't have any power as citizens, because I think power can be reflected in many different ways. Because in a sense, the slaves have power over their masters. Why? Because the masters rely on their slaves in order to be masters, right? So in that sense, they're dependent on having slaves to be masters. And slaves are dependent on masters to have masters, right? And often to live. They're dependent on their masters for many things. In that sense, Kim Jong-un would be completely powerless without all the people in North Korea, right? And in that sense,
Mm-hmm.
he gets all of his power from the people of North Korea. And of course, they're all slaves to the government, and they have no power or say in how the government runs or operates because they're brainwashed 24/7. But in a very real sense, they do have a certain kind of power over Kim Jong-un. In a sense, they perpetuate the system as it goes on, right? Not saying that they actually have any power, but they have power in a different way, and it's not a good way. It sucks. It's like slave power, right? There's slave power and there's master power. And I'm using power in the sense where like we're all dependent on something else in a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
But in like one way, you're kind of dominated and you're forced to be dependent on that. And another way, you're not forced to be dependent on something. Like slaves are forced to be dependent on their masters, but masters are not forced to be dependent on their slaves, right? And also masters have more options. They're dependent on more things, and because they're dependent on more things, or at least they have more options to choose from to gain their power from. And because they have more options to choose from to gain their power from, they are in control and they're masters, and they have more power than the slave does, because the slave is forced to be dependent on one thing for food and sustenance and everything like that. They're forced to depend on their master, or here in America, we're forced to depend on capitalism. We're forced to depend on our jobs for money. We're forced to depend on work. We're forced to depend on our family. And we're forced to depend on all of these things, but we're definitely forced to depend on way less things than the people of North Korea, right? And because of that, we have more power over ourselves because we have more things. We have more choices, right? Our choices aren't as limited as the people from North Korea. And with more choices available to us, we have more freedom. And because we have more freedom, we're more so masters over ourselves than slaves of the world, slaves of the herd, or slaves of whatever, right? Slaves of whatever ideology, because we have more choices and we have more things that we can choose from to do with our time, or to do with like what we do as human beings. sorry, I just went on a super long tangent, but essentially it comes down to how many choices you have. And as people of the United States of America, we have far more choices than people from North Korea.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good way of looking at it. And it also makes one sort of, I guess, a question that, pervades probably the history of political philosophy is individualism versus collectivism, or like the freedom of, any one person to do something versus the community's cohesion, or the community's safety. How much should we value the a community's autonomy or sovereignty, and how much should we view the individual sovereignty, if we want to use like Enlightenment type language that the founding fathers used. And I remember, so something I said, and I think it was in the podcast Matt and I did on Godwin, as a very educational podcast, mostly because we could barely communicate. And like the podcasts I think that are most educational for the audience are the ones that are like the most grueling to put together, or like the most difficult conversations, or like the most rewarding in the end, actually. But as I said in that podcast on Godwin to Matt, that society is not based on consent. Because my friend Matt is an anarcho-capitalist, if anyone doesn't know. And one of the reasons I guess I'm just not convinced of that anarcho-capitalism is a good ideology is, I guess, the ANCAPs want to believe in total freedom for the individual, like total sovereignty for the individual. That's like the best form of social relations, and that's the one that's most desirable, and that's the one we should be aiming for. And I guess I'm sort of the position, and maybe this is Hobbesian, I don't know. I might call it something else. Matt calls it Hobbesian, but of the idea that the individual isn't really entirely you can't have a system of entire individual sovereignty that's based purely on individual sovereignty. I mean, I think I still believe in freedom, whatever that word means, and I still want to have like conversations with people and think about what true freedom is, or what desirable freedom is. I don't believe in just total like mob rule, or just total subservience to the collective. And in my personal life, I'm more of a individualist. But I guess, and I don't know if this is like my own intuitions misleading me philosophically, but I don't feel like free, I guess, in the way that like an anarchist feels free. I feel like there are things beyond me that prevent me from being an entirely sovereign being. And I guess I'm okay with that. I don't really necessarily feel tension with that, if that makes sense.
No, that makes perfect sense. And my thoughts on anarchism or like anarcho-capitalism is that there's always going to be people who want less choices, right? There's always going to be people who say that they want freedom, but in reality, they want someone to tell them what to do, or tell them what to believe, or someone that can just make their lives easier, someone that they can be dependent upon for like support, for orders, and to know how to survive. And there's also always going to be people who want more choices, and people who want to tell others what to do. And because of that, this like anarchism just would never actually work, because even tribes have a structure, even tribes have leaders, and they have people who follow. And although it's like a lot more democratic than what we do, Just like naturally, everyone can't be free, because some people don't want to be free and some people really want to be free, and some people want to tell others what they should do, and some people don't want to do that, and some people want to listen to what others tell them to do. So I don't know, that's my take on it.
Yeah, I don't know if any like psychologists have kind of studied there's obviously a connection between the human mind and how it's constructed and our like political reality and social hierarchy, social structures. And I'd be kind of curious, like, if any psychologists have thought about both the anarchist mentality and like, why an anarchist collective would or would not function due to, I guess, human nature. I don't know if anyone's done any research or thought into that, but that would be like an interesting question to examine as a psychologist.
Yes, it would. And so like my thing is like, why do we have to just be an anarchist? Why do we have to be communists? Why do we have to be a capitalist? Why do we have to be someone who likes democracy, or someone who likes a republic, or someone who likes a dictatorship? Why can't we like mix all these ideas together into something that works for everyone? Or at least works for some people in some place and some people in another place, right?
I mean, I think I'm like, when it comes to, I guess, social structure, I don't know. I think my politics, and this is another buzzword, which Redditors have debated long into the night.
Yeah.
I think I've become more postmodern in my politics.
Okay.
In that I think politics, I guess I used to think politics more as like truth. Like, if I support this policy, it's because it's it's true. It's right. It works. Yeah. I guess, well, maybe true and works they're not necessarily the same thing.
Yeah.
But I guess I've stopped really believing in necessarily truths in politics. And I think politics is probably more historically contingent and, related to environmental factors.
Yeah.
Than we might want to think. So like, I really don't think there's like one way to govern all of humanity. I mean, I think that's like, it kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier about people wanting like easy answers with conspiracy theories.
Yes.
It's like, it's a nice idea to say like, oh, if we just go communist, say, then all the social problems will be solved. Or, oh, if we just let the free market decide for itself, or, if we just let the technocrats control everything and monitor our every movement. Like we could propose all kinds of ideas, but there's really not a catch-all solution to social problems. And it's like, depending on the circumstances, I may or may not support this policy or this form of government. Like it isn't necessarily crazy. Like, so I mentioned to you, I'm reading Peter Gay's The Enlightenment and Interpretation.
Yes.
And many of the philosophers were for enlightened despotism, right? That they were for that they wanted a king or a monarch in general to be educated. Like basically they wanted the philosopher king that Plato was like preaching so fervently. And it's like, back then when monarchies were so prevalent, and the republics, I mean, I guess Geneva was sort of a kind of a pseudo republic. Then of course we had the founding of the US, which was maybe also a kind of republic, kind of democracy. But there was like, the only game in town really was monarchy or oligarchy. So it's understandable if like the French philosophe said they want to try to educate their king, because most people in France at the time were uneducated peasants working in the fields, dying probably very young. And so I can understand why they wouldn't have been, advocating for complete overthrow of the government of the monarchy and a complete establishment of a direct democracy. Now in retrospect, like nowadays, I'm not really for going back to a monarchy. But again, this is like his politics is historical. So
Well, have you ever gone river rafting before?
I have not.
So when you go river rafting, like whitewater rafting, you go on and there's a guide at the back, and then everyone else is kind of on the sides rowing. And the guide in the back, they tell you when to row, how much to row, what kind of rows to do, when to duck, when to do everything on the boat, right? And because they do that, you're able to get from point A to point B safely and in a very fun way, right? If there wasn't a leader there and there was just a bunch of idiots going on a raft, trying to go and try to coordinate themselves, then you'd crash and die probably. You need that raft guide in order to get you going in that scenario, right? But if you're all just with your friends hanging out, drinking beers or whatever, you don't really need a leader to be like, guys, you need to drink your beers like this, right? Because like that situation doesn't require a leader, right? Because there are just some situations that require certain kinds of government and some that don't. In a drinking scenario, you really just need a democracy, unless there's one sober person and everyone's drunk and they're all starting to do something stupid, right? And then it can turn into a totalitarian dictatorship, hopefully, because that sober person is going to tell everyone not to do the stupid thing that they're going to do. So I mean, that's kind of my thoughts on the matter.
No, I think I agree. I don't have much to add in that regard.
Yeah, there's like the thing is, we always want, like, it's what you're saying about the conspiracy theory, like this conspiracy theory or this ideology or whatever, it might work in this scenario, but it's not going to work in this scenario. So I don't know. I was going to ask you kind of a weird question, but I wanted to ask your opinion on it. So have you seen any of the Avenger movies?
I've only seen I think the first one.
The first one. So there's this guy named Thanos, right? And I don't know if you've heard the plot line at all, but in Endgame, he goes and he gets all the Infinity Rings, and then he wipes out half of all the intelligent life in the universe. Just 50% of everyone, because in his civilization there was overpopulation and people were starving and like a bunch of people were dying and suffering. So he thought it was a good idea to wipe out half of the population in the whole world, right? And he did this because he thought in the long term this would help all of life survive, right? Because there would be more resources for everyone to have, and there wouldn't be overpopulation, and there wouldn't be starvation, et cetera, et cetera. And in a sense, he was thinking in a totally rational way. It makes perfect sense. Yeah, it would help everyone out in the long run if 50% of all people died. He's totally correct. But the good in us, or at least the feeling within us, want to say, well, no, because I love my mom, I love my dad, I love my family, I love my friends, and I love living this life right now as well. And I don't want 50% of people to die. I don't want 50% of everyone I know to die right now, because I love them and I know them and they're here right now. And I don't really care about my great, great, great grandchildren at all, because they're imaginary and they don't exist. So I wanted to know your opinion on that whole scenario as far as it goes with like COVID and everything. Because like in reality, we are overpopulated as a species, like severely overpopulated, 7 billion people. That's just not sustainable at all. So in a sense, if more people died, that would be good for us in the long run. But at the same time, I don't want people to die. I don't want people I love to die. So I took precautions. I wear masks. I got the vaccine. I did all that stuff to protect the people I love because they're here right now. And I don't want them to die. And I don't want to die. So that's kind of, it's like, what's your opinion on all that?
Well, I'm sort of reminded of the anarcho. So the argument you put forward sort of reminds me of the anarcho-primitivist school of thought. Which basically argues that industrial civilization was a mistake. It's an evil. And I guess most anarcho-primitivists would say it will eventually collapse, and that's a good thing because most people will die. Most people will be wiped out. They won't be able to survive in the wild. But the people that do survive in the wild will have a better life because the hunter-gatherer type of the hunter-gatherer life is superior, more enjoyable than the life we have now. And I guess I can't say I'm sort of in your camp. I can't really advocate, I'm not going to sit here and say, oh yeah, I think we should do this. That's going to, wipe out 50% of the population on Earth. So the remaining 50% has a great life.
Well, that's a social contract theory in action, right? Because sure, I wouldn't really care if 50% of everyone else, other than the people that I love, die. But at the same time, because I don't care about that, then that gives other people the right to not care about the people I love. So that means I have to care about everyone.
I at some point, I think at some point we're going to reach the overpopulation is going to become even more of a problem than it is now.
Yeah.
So and I worry. I not too long ago I went to a film festival regarding it was an environmentalist film festival, and it was very interesting. I think we're facing. Oh well, this is, I guess everyone's saying this nowadays, so this is the cliche part of the podcast. But I think we are facing certain ecological issues that need to be resolved. I don't necessarily think it's
I don't think that's cliche, man. That's just
I don't necessarily think it's existential or oh, we're all gonna die, tomorrow, or we're all gonna die in 10 years, I think AOC said in some interview. But I think there are issues with industrialization. There are issues with fossil fuels. They're just there are issues. We talked about overpopulation. Just a changing climate overall, which people thought I think climatologists for a long time, they sort of thought the Earth was it corrected itself and it didn't really change. So the kind of idea, the predominant idea in climate science for a while was, well, the climate has basically been the same for most of the planet's history, and it if there's any change in the climate, it kind of goes back to equilibrium. And then there was some I guess I got this from an Adam Curtis documentary that Keegan introduced me to, but there was some climatologist who when he was doing his daily punching his numbers into a computer, which he did in the daily, he accidentally made some mistakes, and it showed that a few changes to his climate model led to climate that had never been seen before on Earth. It led to just insane patterns that didn't really make sense with the model that then existed. And so now I think we have a different model, which is, well, no, if you change this or that to the climate, who knows what kind of consequences you're going to have, and it could be catastrophic. It could be there could be no consequence. You don't know. That's why everyone's always getting angry at the weathermen or the weather. Because the weather's just so complex, we can't really predict. So this is really, I guess this is my long-winded way of saying, I almost think the moral question isn't necessarily that important, because I think
Yeah.
this is, I guess, sort of pessimistic, but I kind of end up at the position where we're gonna go through our environment on this planet is going to be changing drastically, and it's probably going to lead to human cost and
Yeah.
the loss of human life. And I'm not happy about that. I don't like praise it. I'm not
Yeah.
excited about it,
But
but
it's
it's
inevitable.
probably what's going to happen. And I guess if we want the people remaining to have a better life, if we want our children or grandchildren to have a better life, then we have to change our relationship to nature and our relationship to
Yeah.
just the planet as a whole.
Yes. Yeah. And well, I mean, at the same time, though, there's really no stopping the inevitable, in a sense, because like even if like we were to control our population and reduce it drastically, over time something cataclysmic will still happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like if we were to just keep our overpopulation happening and cataclysmic stuff happen, the population would just naturally drop anyways. So that's kind of me playing devil's advocate on my argument earlier, because like in a sense it doesn't really even matter, because like something bad will happen. But like at the same time, that's also what the smoker says when, oh, I don't need to stop smoking, I'm going to die anyways, right? So I don't know.
I mean, I think there's a fine line in a lot of things, I suppose, but there's a fine line between accepting that certain things are beyond your control, but trying to deal with whatever is in your control.
Yes.
So I don't necessarily think that, I mean, as pretentious and as as ridiculous as some environmentalists can be in their rhetoric, and even in their policy prescriptions, I don't necessarily think that certain policies regarding climate and regarding energy, I don't necessarily think they're pointless. But I also think we can't control everything. And to some degree, we're just going to have to adapt. There will be things we'll just have to adapt to, or they'll kill us. I mean, I think we want to try to make life. I think we want to try to make life as pleasant for the people that currently exist and pleasant for our descendants. But we can't do anything. We can't do everything. We can't play God. And I think it's actually helpful. I mean, you might not want to bring it up at a dinner party, but I think it's helpful to like acknowledge that like there will come a time when humans don't exist anymore.
Yes.
There will come a time when we go extinct, and who knows what life will. I mean, I guess it's insects and parasites that will have the longest running, or they'll be here long after we're gone.
They'll have the last laugh for sure.
Yes. And I sort of find that reassuring in a weird way. It's like I don't have to worry as much. Again, I'm not saying don't try to maybe make the world a better place in the moment, but I don't have to worry about like 1,000 years from now, or 500,000 years from now, when probably we'll all be gone, and that'll be that.
Well, so I know that you've talked about Jordan Peterson on your podcast, and do you think in a sense being better towards the environment and kind of advocating for environmental policies, do you think this is in a sense cleaning your own room?
It's clever of you to ask it that way, since I'm not a Peterson fan, but
I mean, neither am I, but like I do like some of his ideas.
He gets the last laugh on me occasionally, I have to say.
Yeah.
And I think I made a joke once. I said the reason I don't like Peterson is I agree with him too much.
Yeah.
But yeah, I actually think that's a good way to think about it. Think about our room as in a larger on a larger scale than our actual room. This is why
Yeah.
so the first episode of Beyond Talking Points, Matt and I talked about the debate between Zizek and Jordan Peterson.
Yeah.
And this was like Zizek's main point that I don't think Peterson really answered. Zizek was like, you tell everyone to clean their room, but if they're like the world around them is in turmoil and they clean their room, that's really not going to do anything.
Yeah.
And so they need to like get engaged with the broader broader social issues and kind of clean their room that way. Whereas Peterson's basically taking the individualist approach of clean your room, deal with your own stuff, and don't really worry about other things, or don't really try to change other things, because like this is his criticism of, I guess, what he sees as like the postmodern neo-Marxist, or he sees as the radical left. He thinks they're a bunch of college students who think they can change the world, and they're so ignorant. And if they just realize that they can barely control their own lives, they should. But I can never really get behind that idea. I mean, even if there are young people that like think they know more than they do, which is, I mean, that's always been the case of young people thinking they know more than they do. But I can't say it's like, I can't necessarily say to those young people, like, don't have that desire to change the world, or don't go out there and try to change the world.
Well, I think Jordan Peterson is using this clean your own room analogy kind of cheaply, because like if you're the kind of person that has cleaned your mind and you know what you want to do with your life, you know what you're passionate about, and you go and seek that in a sense, like you've cleaned your room and you're ready to go, and you're following your path. You're like, if you're an activist in something, or if you're a philosopher or a writer, or like you're following your passion, you're following your dream, then I think that in a sense is like, hey, you cleaned your room and now you're ready to go out and play, right?
That makes sense. I mean, I think like as long as one doesn't forget the broader social world, then I think you can say clean your room first, clean your like literal room first, and then clean the world up, or clean other people's rooms, or clean the rooms of regarding other things. You can start with yourself and then build out, and then expand your reign of influence, and expand your interests.
Well, it's like you can't love others until you love yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, maybe that's kind of a cliche, but in a sense, it's like, it's been very true for me, at least, because if you're like depressed, you can't really like help other people, because you're sitting on the couch and you're kind of just being super negative, and you're affecting people in negative ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think what I'm trying to get, I guess, when in my criticisms of Peterson, I'm just trying what I disagree with the most, I guess, is I sort of see him as, I sort of see this underlying pessimism, beneath his argument of clean your room.
Yes.
I mean, this probably goes back to the fact that he is a Christian of sorts.
Yeah. Well, he's very close-minded.
And he's basically taken this idea of, and he wouldn't put it like this, but he's basically taken the idea of original sin to heart.
Yes.
And like, oh, you're a wretched creature that would have been a Nazi in Nazi Germany, and you would have like supported Stalin under the Soviet Union. And so he's basically saying and again, I'm sort of exaggerating his tone here, or exaggerating his rhetoric, but he's basically saying you're a monster. And so you shouldn't want to change the world, because if you try, you're going to kill 500,000 people. You're going to result in the death of 500,000 people with your crazy ideas about wanting to change the world. And I guess that just means maybe he and I have a different view of human nature, or we have a different view of activism, popular activism. And because I guess I don't accept that as like the final answer to the questions we're raising. I think that's a defeatist attitude, which really doesn't help anybody.
So do you think Jordan Peterson is kind of a nihilist in a sense?
He's probably more of a nihilist than he wants to admit.
Yeah.
Just like he's more of a postmodernist than he wants to admit.
Yeah.
I sort of, I mean, this is my take on Peterson. And so this is where I like get sort of Nietzschean. Like, you know how Nietzsche, believed in analyzing the psychology of philosophers to get at what they were really thinking.
Yes.
And I think some people, when they do that, it's sort of a cheap trick and they do it very sloppily.
Yeah.
But if I may like put on my, Freudian hat.
Yeah.
And I look at Jordan Peterson's, I think a lot of the issues he has with a lot of the issues he gets involved in when it comes to politics, I think are like issues that he's working out within himself.
Yeah.
Or like demons he's battling within himself, and they're kind of getting the targets that they're getting projected onto idiotic leftists on the internet.
Yeah.
They're getting he's turning other people like other people are personifying whatever inner demons are in him. And again, I'm not trying to be, I guess, overly disrespectful or like crude about it. I
don't think Jordan Peterson is gonna listen to this podcast and then email you like a hate message. So it's all good.
I mean, it's also like, I don't know, when he talks about like, so another like thing I don't always trust him on is when he talks about like relationships and like gender roles and whatnot.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the people on the left like equally exaggerate, and again, they call him a Nazi, they call him a member of the alt-right, a bunch of nonsense. But like his attitude towards like masculinity, I sort of feel like he secretly worries he's not masculine enough. And so like he's like preaching this like, idea of stoic of masculinity that like the Stoics say in ancient Greece.
Yes.
Or almost this like Spartan way of life for men. It's sort of like he's almost talking like that to compensate for, the underlying fear that maybe I'm not like the warrior that I'm like preaching about. Again, I can't read his mind. And maybe I'm totally off, but that's sort of like my feel for Jordan Peterson. And I guess like my ultimate gripes with him. I don't like think he's a bad man. I don't like despise him or like think he's like the worst person on the face of the planet. But I do think, and it sort of annoys me when people on the left, turn him into a caricature and like, put words in his mouth that he didn't say, because it means when I'm trying to criticize Jordan Peterson, I have to like parse out the BS with the, legitimate criticisms of him. I have to, say like, I don't think I had to specify, like, I don't think he's a Nazi. Because people on the internet will literally say, "Oh, Jordan Peterson is a Nazi," or like, "Oh, Jordan Peterson's a raging misogynist," and I just like have to bat away these silly claims, and then I can get to the actual, reason why I think his work isn't as great as some people think it is. And I think I understand, and I think I understand why his work is so popular, and I think he probably is helping some young men who are like really struggling right now in this culture in this day and age. But at the same time, I think he's like kind of become a cult like figure. A lot of public intellectuals. This is I think a lot of public intellectuals end up becoming cult like figures, like from their fan base. They have their heyday, and then they kind of like go away, and people like stop talking about them. It's like the New Atheists. Like I was very influenced by the New Atheists when I was a teenager, and I was like, I consider them like a very important part of my intellectual development. Because I do think the first, the most important thing philosophy can do for you, at least when you're first studying philosophy, is to rid you of superstitions.
Yes.
And so the first superstition you sort of have to rid yourself of is the religious impulse.
Yes.
And so, but no one, the New Atheists had their heyday, and now we don't talk about them anymore. Now we talk about other things.
Yes.
So, which I think it'll probably happen with Jordan Peterson too. It's like he is having his heyday right now. Both his critics, he's most lauded and criticized intellectual right now or whatever. And then someone else will come along and people will forget about Jordan Peterson, and this is the way of the world. That was a very long-winded answer to your question, but there you go.
No, it's a good one. I mean, that's kind of what I know. I said I wanted to take a break from Nietzsche when I was talking to you, but I just had to say this. That's kind of what Nietzsche's talking about when he said that God is dead, right? Like all of our ideals from the past, they eventually die and are replaced with something else, right? Like God died, and then the new atheists came to be, right? And they had kind of the same closed-minded arguments as with like God, right? Because I remember I was listening to your nihilist podcast with Matt, and you guys were talking about how like why would the universe be any more meaningful if there was a God, right? Because a lot of times the argument against there being a God is that or like the argument for the universe being meaningless is that there is no God. But it's kind of like a faulty argument, because like why would it be any more meaningful with a God, right? So with that said, like all these movements just come and go, and a lot of times they have a bunch of bullshit like in them, but there's definitely some good ideas that you can get out of them.
Well, and actually if I may I guess make another few comments on the New Atheists for a second.
Yes, please.
The second episode of my solo podcast was actually just me reading an essay I wrote. At some point Matt and I we're thinking about maybe like writing some essays on some broadly political or philosophical topics, and maybe like self-publishing a book or something. That's a long way away, obviously, but I wrote it for a potential book perhaps in the future. I wrote an essay on religion, and so it's the second episode of the Philosopher's Guide to the Apocalypse, but the essay was titled, and the episode is titled, How the New Atheists Paid for Our Sins. And I called it that because I sort of I saw like a place for the New Atheists, but at least in like in public discourse, and also in my own life, obviously. And I think that place was it was post 9/11, right? So there was I think a lot of people having silly conversations about faith, and another old debate raging on the political sides of YouTube in the 2010s was the regressive left's opinion on Islam, right? So the new atheists thought many people were too soft on Islam.
Yes.
But other people thought the new atheists were Islamophobic. That was another time when I diverged from the typical leftist positions, because I didn't think the new atheists were Islamophobic, nor do I currently think they were Islamophobic. So the new atheists came along in a time where like religion became a more prominent like conversational piece,
Yeah.
and people were asking fundamental questions about the role of faith in a person's life and the role in faith in politics and government, and sort of like their like single-mindedness, say, or their like simplistic arguments were like what was needed maybe in the moment to like fight a lot of stupidity and ignorance on the one hand, and they like opened up a lot of doors for their audience, for their listeners. And I think people who and when you open doors for people, they can like move past you or decide you were wrong, or like gain a deeper understanding. So like I think now what I try to like show in that essay is I think my position has deepened. My position on religion and my opinions on religion have deepened since my like new atheist phase, and now I like disagree with the new atheists more. But
because
I needed them to like get me thinking about religion, and get me like give me that critical mentality towards religion before I could like move past them. So the reason they paid for our sins is we can like now look back and be like, oh, these silly new atheists with their silly arguments, ha 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 ha. But maybe the reason we could do that is because the new atheists were willing to put forward those arguments and willing to be disagreeable on an issue which even today people are still unwilling to be disagreeable about. That's why they say never talk about politics and religion in public.
Well, they like brought people out of like believing things that just didn't have like any like proof, right? They brought people out of decades, centuries of being like proselytized into a religion or indoctrinated into a religion and believing that like adulterators should be stoned to death or whatever. So like in a way that's good, but I'm sure don't you think, or like were you already thinking the thoughts of the new atheists before you were introduced to them?
But before I was introduced to new atheists, I really didn't think much at all about religion. So that they were really my introduction. Well, actually, that's not entirely true. I take that back. When I was in the 7th grade, I had a like world civ class. And this was about the same time when I was like introduced to the new atheists. So I had this teacher in school who was like going over the core tenets of the Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, explaining their history, explaining the various opinions within these traditions. And that's, I think, where my interest in religion started. And then I started, got exposed to the new atheists. So it was sort of like, a standard curriculum and how they would like portray religion versus like the more polemical way, arguments the new atheists are putting forward. And so that was, I guess, those two things together were like my first, they were my first exposures to religion and religious criticism, because I wasn't raised in a religious family, and people, when I was a little kid, like, no one ever talked to me. Really, no one barely talked to me. People barely talked to me about religion when I was a kid. Like, it just didn't. And maybe that's like, and again, if we want to get like psychoanalytic about it, maybe that's why I'm not religious now, right? Because people didn't tell me when I was 6 that I was like the son, that Jesus died for my sins. I mean, I got this from the culture. And another thing I mentioned in the essay was, I actually remember, I think I was like 8 or 9, and I like went to my mom crying one day because I was like worried I was going to go to hell. My family had never told me I was going to go to hell. My family barely talked to me about it, but I just like got from the culture this idea of hell, and then I got scared, like, oh no, what if I'm going to hell?
Yeah.
So it's, I mean, you can't get away from religion even if in a non-religious household. But I was barely exposed to it until I started learning about it through school and on my own.
Yes. So I actually got to head out here in a minute because I got to work super early tomorrow. But I wanted to ask you one more question just before you go.
Sure.
You're a cool guy. You're inquisitive. You're academic. So like, what do you think is kind of your purpose in life? Like, what have you made out to be your goal, or what do you want out of life?
Um,
Kind of a personal question, but you don't have to answer it. You don't want to.
yeah, no, I don't mind. I don't mind answering it in the slightest. I mean, I think probably my answer to that question will change over time. So I'm like almost, I'll be turning 22 in about over a week. Be turning 22 on the 21st of this month.
Cool. That's my friend's birthday.
Ooh, nice. It's also the birthday of Kim Kardashian, Benjamin Netanyahu, Samuel Taylor Coleridge.
Well, shoot.
So I'm in good company. But
yeah.
So what I was going to say was my answer to this question will probably change over time because we always change as we grow and have more life experience. But I've always so I guess I'll answer it like this. People like Socrates, one of his famous lines is Socrates / Plato, I guess, depending on how you want to think about it. The unexamined life is not worth living. But I think I would want to like rephrase that and say, I am able to live the unexamined life. So like whatever. So that's a little less prescriptive and a little more personal. But like however my mind is constructed and however like I think about things, I am unable to just like accept, authority from the church or accept authority from the state. I've always been like, the kind of person that asks a million questions and wants to know how things work. And I've always been interested in a wide range of subjects like history and biology, psychology, politics, philosophy. And so I guess right now, I think my purpose in life is to develop as a thinker, sort of figure out how to go, live in this world as somebody who is always questioning everything. Because that's just, I'm at my most happy when I am like grappling with very difficult ideas. So I guess I'm almost like I'm giving a Nietzschean answer. I like the life I want is a one of struggle, where I'm struggling with myself and struggling with other people, and because I think it's only through that struggle that you learn about yourself, you learn about others, and you learn about the universe and the human mind.
So adventure, climbing that mountain, going through the labyrinth. That's kind of what you want.
Yes.
Cool.
I accept that I am Sisyphus pushing a rock up a mountain only to have it fall back down and have it to push it up another mountain. That is the life of the mind. You're never satisfied. It's never over.
Yes.
But I wouldn't want it any other way. So
cool. Well, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it. That was fun.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah. So how can people reach you?
So you can, I have 2 podcasts, the Beyond Talking Points, which you can find on YouTube or on any podcatcher. Same for that's the one I do with Matt Keck, my friend. And then the other one is a solo podcast, which you can also find on YouTube or any podcatcher, The Philosopher's Guide to the Apocalypse. I haven't put out episodes for either in a while just because I've been so busy, but I plan on getting back into it. So there'll be much more content in the future.
Awesome. Well, that's it, folks. Thank you for listening. Examine your life a little bit if you want to. But even if you don't, I just hope you find something about life worth living regardless. So anyway, thank you for listening. Take it easy.